This is a great question, but is very complicated to answer, and I'm not aware of any studies on survivors and their welfare after the war, but we do have some answers. After the war, statistics state that 40 million people were displaced. This obviously is not just Holocaust survivors, but also POWs and people generally displaced by war, as it had a massive toll on the civilian population. It created a massive refugee crisis. United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration was formed in 1943 to help people get back to their homes, but there were a large number of people who could not or would not return home. Or they had, and there was no one there, or they were no longer owners of their homes. This is because they often stopped paying their mortgages or rent because their assets were frozen and they were in camps or hiding. So in many cases, the banks repossessed the homes and all of the belongings, and other people purchased them cheaply. Getting them back was often not possible. Survivors often faced hostility by neighbors if they returned. Often this was because they were afraid they would take their property back. The film 1945 broaches this really well. In 1946, there was a pogrom in Poland where 42 Holocaust survivors were killed and 40 were injured. This massively affected people wanting to return. Most countries were not quick to welcome so many refugees, so most people lived in displaced persons, or DP camps, until they could secure a place to live. In some cases, they were on the site of former concentration camps. The DP camps operated like small cities. They had classes so people could retrain if they wanted a new profession, had schools for children, entertainment, and clubs for hobbies and politics. However, life was still not very comfortable, as often families didn't have their own homes. Food rationing was still in effect in Europe, and most residents had to abide by curfews. But because of the number of young single people who were the only survivors of their families, or one of a few survivors, there was a psychological need to create families. While sometimes these weren't the best relationships, weddings and births were regular occurrences. From Yad Vashem, this is a photo of 9 couples marrying on the same day. Eventually, the inhabitants were able to emigrate as countries began to allow it. For example, the US eventually allowed 80,000 people to enter, while countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Israel, Belgium, and others eventually allowed a certain number of refugees to enter. People often emigrated to where they already had family or friends. Sometimes synagogues or communities of Polish immigrants, for example, would help set up programs for them in their new countries. The last DP camp closed in 1959, with most people still left given citizenship in Germany or Austria. Psychologically, most survivors did not receive adequate care and lived with serious PTSD. Some have been quoted saying they physically left the camps, but not mentally. Experiences differ by person, though. Some attribute their experiences to unhappy family lives, some committed suicide